Hi YouTube, I just wanted to do a very basic video to explain the line and wash technique in watercolour. So with this little beach hut, what I've done is I've used two different dip pens and a pot of ink. When you choose your ink, obviously it needs to be waterproof because you're going to be putting washes of watercolour over the top. So when I'm choosing the subject matter for these line and wash paintings, what I'm looking for is something that isn't too perfect. So any buildings that I do, I quite often choose run down kind of thatched cottages or little shacks like this, because it just means that your perspective, if it's slightly wrong, you can get away with it. And also, if your verticals aren't dead vertical, you can get away with that as well. And it just means you can be a lot faster and looser with it. And I like to do lots of hatching as well. So you can either hatch in one direction with the pen, or you can do what's called cross hatching, where you go back in the other direction as well. And this can be used to add texture, or it can be used to add shadows and things. You can see on this one I've done a few kind of black areas for shadow. You could really go to town with this and add loads of black into it if you want to. Notice on this first image I've just done very simple lines for the leaves of the palms. Okay, and then on this second image I've come in with a finer dip pen and I've added all the fronds onto the palms. And although that looks complicated, it's actually really quick to do. You get into a rhythm, and obviously if you've practiced and done them a few times it helps, but you do get faster and faster. And the same with the hatching. You can see I've come into the black areas that I've done and I've just hatched in a direction, and that actually makes it look like the light is coming from the right hand side of the picture. You don't have to use dip pens like I did on this one. You can buy fine line pens in packs with different sized nibs, or you could buy more technical pens like Rotring pens. They're a bit more expensive, but they give a really good fine line, and Rotring ink is really good as well because it's really black. That's the type of ink that I've used on this. Okay, for the first wash of watercolour I've just used raw sienna, and you can see here I haven't gone right to the bottom. I've just left a few kind of brush strokes, and I think this helps to add to the loose feel of the whole picture. The next wash was a mix of raw sienna and burnt umber, and this was just applied to the whole beach hut. Then I added some green to all the palm trees and the bushes in the background. This was just a mix of olive green and cadmium yellow. For the sky on this one, I did it slightly different how I normally do skies. Normally I put blue in the whole background and then I dab out the clouds with a bit of kitchen paper while the blue is still wet. On this one, I just left very crisp lines and just gave kind of very rough cloud shapes. And just kept it very simple, and it was really quick to do, just tucking it in between all the palm trees. And I think it looks really quite effective, leaving so much white as well as the blue. Incidentally, I'm using St. Petersburg White Night paints to do this, and the blue that I chose for the sky is called Azure. You can see I did just a few horizontal bands of blue as well, just to suggest a bit of sea in the background. Then I added a few suggestions of palm trees in the background that are a bit shorter, and I've also added a few purple shadows. Those are done with a colour called violet, but I've also mixed a bit of English red in with the violet just to neutralise it a bit, otherwise it's a bit strong. Okay, and then the final stages on this one were just to kind of strengthen some of the colours, just by adding darker versions of all the colours that I'd used already. I also used the fine dip pen just to go around some of those smaller palm trees in the background. I've added a few kind of little bumps to suggest sort of rocks or bumpy bits of sand in the foreground, and then sign it. And it was really quick to do. I also added a Payne's grey kind of big long shadow coming from the shack, and I think that really helps kind of lift it forward a little bit in the picture. It's worth mentioning that although these paintings are called line and wash, where you do your lines first and then you put the wash on over the top, there's no reason why you can't come back at the end and add line after your washes. You could even, do that completely. You could do a watercolour painting and then come straight in at the end and do all your pen work afterwards. It doesn't really matter either way round. You get the same sort of effect. Okay, for the second painting, what I did was start with pencil, and you can see here I've just established the kind of main perspective lines, Again, it's a shack, it's quite rough looking, so a lot of the kind of verticals and the perspective lines don't have to be perfect, but this gives a rough shape to start with. Then I've gone over all of those pencil lines with my wider dip pen, and you can see again with all the palms I've just done kind of single lines where each kind of palm frond is going to go. Then, as in the last image, I've gone in with my finer dip pen and done all the palm fronds. This gives a much finer effect and it helps it look a lot more kind of realistic. Then carrying on with my finer dip pen, I've gone in and I've done all the hatching. This establishes lots of textures, like the textures on the roof, and it also means that you can get in there, get lots of shadows in. If you've got any really big black areas, you can always switch back to the thicker dip pen and you'll get some really nice darks in there, and that makes a huge difference. They say some of the best line drawings are 50% black, 50% white. It doesn't matter quite so much when you're doing a line and wash and you're going to be putting colour on it, but if you're just doing a pen drawing, you'd want to add quite a lot more black, so it becomes roughly 50-50. The first watercolour wash that I did again was raw sienna, just for the sand area. Then I used raw sienna mixed with burnt umber again to do the roof. And I've also put a bit on some of the palm fronds where the ends had sort of died a little bit. The rest of the palm fronds just were painted with an initial base colour of cadmium yellow. Then I added some strong green, which is olive green again mixed with a tiny bit of cadmium yellow. The sky I did in the same way as the previous painting because I want these two to look like a sort of pair in my portfolio. So you can see I've done that thing where I left all of the white kind of cloud effects with kind of crisp lines, and I've just made them kind of sweep in from one side, and I think that works quite well. The sky was done with azure blue again to give a particularly kind of tropical look. It's quite a nice bright blue. I've done the door in the same colour and the kind of stripes, horizontal stripes for the sea. Next I used some burnt umber for the main walls on the shack and also for some of the kind of shadows underneath the textured parts of the roof. Then I neutralised some violet again with a bit of English red, and I've used that for all the shadows on the sand. Then I used a colour called yellow green in the St. Petersburg White Night set, just to brighten a lot of the palm fronds and a few of the plants. I think this makes the whole thing look a lot more tropical. Okay, and then the final stages on this painting were similar to before, where you just go in and you strengthen a lot of the colours, using the same colours you've used already, but maybe just with more pigment in. I've also gone in and I've used my mix of violet with English red, and I've put lots of extra shadows in, like underneath the roof, quite wide shadows, and then underneath the whole house as well, under the platform, under a few plants, and I think this really kind of helps bring it out and gives the whole picture a lot more contrast. You may have noticed in some of the earlier stages that my painting was looking a bit buckled, a bit kind of wavy, and that's just because sometimes when you're putting big washers on, your paper does go a bit wavy, but what tends to happen is as it dries it flattens out, especially if you use thicker paper. So I'm using 300 grams per square metre, so 300 GSM paper. If you buy thinner paper, like 170 GSM, it will buckle a lot more. You might not ever get it to go flat, but I recommend using 300 GSM, and then you've got a good chance of flattening it out afterwards, even without having to stretch your paper. Okay, if any of you are watching this video and you're thinking of taking up watercolour painting, I thoroughly recommend you giving those two beach hut scenes a try, because the technique of line and wash, although it can sometimes look complicated because of all the hatching actually happens really quickly, a lot quicker than you think, and you get really kind of bold effects, very stylised, and like I say, yeah, it just happens really quite fast. This is probably some of the fastest techniques that I do with watercolour. Each one of those beach hut paintings took me around 2 hours to do. Okay, I'm just going to leave you with this final image of a farmhouse. I did this for my cousin when he got married to his wife. This was the venue where they got married, and we were lucky enough to stay at this place for a long weekend. So this image is obviously just showing you the pen stages with all the hatching. And then this is what it looked like as the final painting. So you can see in this one, I added the blue to the sky and then I used kitchen paper to soften all the clouds in. This does give a slightly more realistic effect to the clouds. I've also used Payne's Grey for all of the additional shadows. Obviously lots of the shadows show up just with the pen, but they're kind of emphasised if you do washes of shadowy colours over the top. Okay, if you've enjoyed this video, please check out my other painting tutorial videos and hit subscribe to see anything I do in the future. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.